So today's episode is entitled, What Side Do You Choose? And as usual, I'm going to start this episode off with a quote. Others have seen what is and asked why. I have seen what could be and asked why not. That's a quote by Pablo Picasso. So basically, the point of this podcast is to address the issue that our brain can only operate in one or two ways. Um, our brain can either operate in creativity or survival. And when we operate in survival, we incapacitate our ability to be creative. Um, like we might be able to solve the solution to a problem immediately. Like if we fall in water and we need to get out, we can figure out how to get out of that water. That's not creativity. That's just like problem solving, immediately. That's kind of like 1 plus 1, but that's not being innovative or creative. And when we're operating in this survival mindset, we can't be creative because the number one focus of the survival mindset is just preservation of life. It's not to achieve a higher state or to gain a higher level or to create something out of nothing, to solve a problem for the present and the future. When you're in survival mode, your mindset is to solve the immediate right now, the present, to get yourself out of danger so that you can continue to exist. Um, when we look on the internet, I simply just type this in on Google, and psychology actually defines what a survival mode is. So it says survival mode is a short term, fear based mode of thinking you enter when your fight or flight response is triggered. It's the poisonous mentality that leads you to attack or retreat during stressful times rather than communicate or embrace. So when you're operating in that stress or that fear mindset, your only goal is to get out of that situation because it is uncomfortable, and your brain in some way associates that with you know some fear that's in your mind or you meeting your demise. So I went on to howstuffworks.com, and I dissected a little bit more of the fight or flight reflex because I know that we're all familiar with the fight or flight reflex, but we might not know what all happens during a fight or flight reflex. I'm sure we've all felt it. And if somebody asks you to explain it, you could be like, yeah, my heart felt like this and I was breathing like this. But there's actually a lot of science to the fight or flight reflex. And again, this is surface level. You can dive deeper into it if you want to, but I'm just putting the information out there just to spark your interest and give you something to think about. So on howstuffworks.com, on the article that discusses the fight or flight reflex, more specifically how fear works, this is what I'm tongue twisted today. It's been a long day, but this is what the author has to say. So to produce the fight or flight response, the hypothalamus activates two systems, the sympathetic nerve system and the adrenal cortical system. The sympathetic nervous system uses nerve pathways to initiate reactions in the body, and the adrenal cortical system uses the bloodstream. The combined effect of these two systems are the fight or flight response. So basically, when we have that fear response from us, evolving over time, uh, back in like our early times developments as human beings, we had this fight or flight response to keep us alive. When we would enter in situations that our brains had determined were not conducive to our survival, it would initiate this fight or flight response, which would cause us to make an immediate reaction, an immediate response. Just like when you hear a loud noise, you run. That's fight or flight response reflex. You don't have to think about doing what you need to do. You just do it. When you hear something fly over your head, like even if it's a bug or just something low, you duck. That's just that knee jerk fight or flight reflex. That's a simpler version. But it definitely goes into more detail when you're in more dire situations, not only um like pure survival, like physically, but also when you feel like your lifestyle may be in jeopardy. Like if you don't have enough money to pay your bills, if you're not careful, you can enter into that fight or flight reflex, which then you're more worried about the immediate, like how could I pay my bills immediately, instead of trying to creatively sit down and think, long term, how can I stop this problem from reappearing in my life. But your ability to be creative again is hampered by the fear or the fight or flight reflex that is now taking over your body, or we have allowed to take over our body. The article continues by saying, when the hypothalamus tells the sympathetic nervous system to kick into gear, the overall effect is that the body speeds up, tenses up, and becomes generally very alert. So this is not, if you think about it, this doesn't sound like a creative posture. Like when you're creative, you're kind of grounded, you're just chilling, you're at ease, you're at peace, your breath's under control, you're not really worried about anything happening to you immediately. You feel free to be you and to be open, to be vulnerable, and you feel comfortable in your surroundings. At least that's how I feel when I'm creative. Being tense, being, hyper vigilant, alert, always constant about my surroundings and stuff like that. That's more of like the posture I had when I went out on patrols and stuff like that in the military. They always teach us to be vigilant. It's not just a walk in the woods or a walk through the desert or whatever. You're constantly trying to look and find any type of hint or indicator that might be able to keep you from making a bad decision, ultimately ending up in the destruction of your life or the lives of others. So you're constantly staying in this hyper vigilant state. And then when something explodes or you receive contact in one direction or another, your immediate reaction is to fight or flight. So either you're gonna, fight the enemy, or you're gonna run from the enemy. And in the Marines, they trained me to fight the enemy. So through the training that they gave me, my instant response would be to turn towards danger and to do what I had to do based on the commands I was given. People who don't undergo training, and it doesn't have to be military training, it could be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, law enforcement training, any type of self-defense training, karate, Krav Maga, any of that type of stuff. How you're going to handle stress and your fight or flight reflex is going to be different. And when you have that discipline or that calmness about you, you can then in turn be creative. And that was one of the big things I learned from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as opposed to the military. Even though the military does preach on, having the calmness about you under pressure so that you could think more clearly, that lesson really clicked with me while I was taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because if you panic, you're just going to gas out and then you're not going to be good for nothing. So you need to realize that, yeah, I'm in the moment. Yeah, I'm in a pickle, but the only way I'm going to get myself out of this pickle is being calm and trying to think my way out of this problem. Some people can use brute strength or flexibility or speed, but at the end of the day, the common denominator that makes great UFC fighters or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters, or even, operators in the military, infantrymen, is their ability to think, because not all problems can be fixed with a hammer. Just like you go into a toolbox and there's certain tools for certain jobs, there's screwdrivers, pliers, a wrench, a hammer. Those tools are created for specific jobs. So you can't use one tool for every job. So when you're in that fight or flight reflex, usually your reflex or your go-to is aggression. Aggression or to retreat from the situation. And sometimes those may be good choices, but then there might be another choice that you can make outside of that might result in a better outcome, but you won't be able to see that choice because your ability to be creative is again prohibited by the fact that you don't have your fight or flight reflex under control. Basically fear. So again, some of the symptoms or things that you'll feel that this article talks about when you're in that fight or flight response to whatever the stimulus is your heart rate and your blood pressure increase, your pupils dilate to take in as much light as possible, veins in your skin contract to send more blood to major muscle groups. And that's what's responsible for the chill you sometimes get associated with fear. Less blood in your skin to keep it warm. There's less blood in your skin to keep it warm. Your blood glucose level increases. Your muscles tense up, energized by adrenaline and glucose, responsible for the goosebumps again when the tiny bumps attached to each hair on the surface of your skin tense up and the hairs are forced upright, pulling the skin with them. Smooth muscles relaxes in order to allow more oxygen into the lungs. And there were several more symptoms that the article goes on to discuss about things associated with the fight or flight response. And again, when you go over those symptoms that I was talking about, like your blood pressure and your heart rate shooting up, your pupils dilating, getting goosebumps, your glucose level rises, your muscles tense up, and all of that stuff. Again, that doesn't sound like you're in a position or a place to be creative. Like, if you watch, like, I just go with what I know. I give examples of what I've been through. So I talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I talk about the Marine Corps, stuff that I can relate to, flight, stuff like that. When you look at black belts or higher belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as opposed to white belts who have just entered into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, by and large, I'm not saying this is everybody, but by and large, you can always tell, a distinct difference, because white belts are spastic. They're very tense and rigid, and they haven't figured out their flow yet, what they call a flow, how to transition from one move to another and kind of come up with a game plan of what you want to do. You have like a bunch of counters and moves that will work, and if this doesn't work, then I'll go for this and stuff. That's the black belt mentality. They look at jiu-jitsu as chess. It's about the end game. It's not about immediately taking this pawn or taking this foot that they left out or this wrist. It's about, I'm taking this wrist control in order to establish this, which can lead to this, which ultimately will help me gain this, which was your plan in the beginning. And that, I've always felt, is something admirable about the higher belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because just that calmness under stress is just, it's almost to the point that when you're fighting a higher belt and they're calm and they're not moving spastic and they're moving slow and precise and intentional, it's almost intimidating, because how you feel and you're tense and you're acting stiff and rigid, and you're in your fight or flight and they're just flowing, and there's something about that calmness that's unsettling. So now that we've talked about the fight or flight reflex or the survival part of the brain, let's talk about creativity. And the information that I'm going to share with you now, I got in large part from creativityatwork.com, this website. So you can Google this website and it'll give you a more in-depth aspect of creativity and what creativity looks like. Now, this website is largely talking about creativity in reference to business, because there have been a lot of specialists who've associated that the number one separating component between individuals and business is creativity. And if you have an idea but you don't act on them, that's imaginative, but not creativity. So creativity is the ability to generate ideas but then act on them and to create something from those ideas. So the author in the article begins by saying, creativity is a way of living life that embraces originality and makes unique connections between seemingly disparate, I don't know, it's a typo in the article, ideas. The most creative people find ways around obstacles because they see them not just as roadblocks, but as opportunities. So if you were in that fear mindset, right? And you see a roadblock, you have to think, how can I get around this, in order to survive, But when you're in the creative mindset, you see that roadblock and you think, you know, this way is shut down. But that doesn't mean all ways are shut down. So now you have opened your mind up to the possibility of finding another direction or another way to get to the goal that you want, kind of like a maze. You try one route, but it doesn't work. It doesn't mean that there's no way out of the maze. It just means that way didn't work, and that's creativity versus getting in the fear mindset, because the fear mindset just is worried about, one single solution. If I run, then I'll be out of this problem. But the creativity is a way of dealing with roadblock after roadblock. Even though an opportunity might not present itself, you create one. So another definition that I found on the website, I'm sorry, the previous quote was from Google, the one that had the typo in it. And this quote is the beginning of the article. So on the beginning of the article, it says, creativity is the act of turning new and imaginative ideas into reality. Creativity is characterized by the ability to perceive the world in new ways, to find hidden patterns, to make connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, and to generate solutions. Creativity involves two processes, thinking then producing. And that goes back to being imaginative versus creativity. So in this article, we haven't discussed the symptoms of creativity, but you can see, the difference between being in a fear mindset and a fight or flight mindset and a creative mindset. You can't be creative if you're not calm, at rest, at peace, comfortable in your surroundings, feeling loose, not tense. Your heart rate when you're being creative is not beating out the wall. It's not like you're running and you're just sitting still. You can't be creative in that space. You have to create a space for you to be creative. Even in the midst of adversity, we have to create a space for us to be creative. So, for instance, using the example I gave previously, if you are unable to pay your bills at this moment in time, freaking out is not going to help you solve that problem. But being creative will. So coming up with creative ways to come up with income, legitimate income, that will last a duration of time as opposed to solve a problem immediately would be a more fitting solution to the problem that you face now of not being able to pay your bills, rather than selling your TV or something to immediately get cash, and then you've solved that problem, but then in turn you've created another problem because now you don't have a TV, or you owe somebody money if it was on a loan. So now you've just created a domino effect. So if we took time out, took a breath, created a space to be creative, we could have focused on this one problem, dealt with this one problem, and then possibly not have created other problems in the future. And this goes with business, this goes with life, every station in our life, this can be applicable, even though this article is largely based on business. So in the article, something I found interesting is something that the author calls the creativity gap. So in 2012, Adobe study on creativity shows 8 in 10 people feel that unlocking creativity is critical to economic growth. And nearly 2/3 of respondents feel creativity is valuable to society. Yet a striking minority, only 1 in 4 people, believe they are living up to their own creativity. So what does that say? Even people in society have identified that creativity is the number one thing that sets people apart. Fear is common. People act on their fears every day. People live in their fear every day, and it keeps them in their comfort zone. But people who are creative are the people that we look up to in life. Actors, movie stars, politicians. These are all people that have come from some similar backgrounds as us, but have created a path through society through their creativity in order to get to the places they have gotten to. This is not the case in all cases, but by and large, this fits most people's dynamics. Um, the article continues by saying studies by Clayton M. Christensen and his researchers uncovered the innovator's DNA. Your ability to generate innovative ideas is not merely a function of the mind, but also a function of 5 key behavioral factors that optimize your brain for discovery. So this was another part of the article that I found interesting, where it talks about the fact that creativity is just not something the mind merely possesses, but it's something that we can work on as individuals. And it says that we can work on and improve our creativity by focusing on these 5 key behavioral factors. And those 5 key behavioral factors are associating, which is drawing connections between questions, problems, or ideas from unrelated fields. Number 2 is questioning. Number 3 is observing. Number 4 is networking. And number 5 is experimenting. So these are 5 proven ways that we can maneuver through our issues, that we can come up with ways to improve our creativity. By making associations, by questioning our observations, by making those observations, by networking, and by experimenting. These are all proven ways through studies that we can become more creative. And in becoming more creative, we can better serve ourselves and our communities, because, again, everybody operates out of fear. Fear is a common emotion, and it's the emotion that we give precedence in our lives too much. Fear is the reason that we stay in our comfort zone, which may result in us staying in relationships that we don't need to be in, jobs we don't need to be in, apartments that we don't need to be in, states or whatever, communities we don't need to be in. Fear keeps us in that comfort zone. And growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. You have to step out of that comfort zone in order to grow and to pursue the things that you want to pursue and to obtain legitimate change. And if we're in that fight or flight mindset, we can't be creative. So we can't come up with solutions to our problems that are long term. Every decisions you make in the fight or flight response are immediate. They're quick fixes, the knee-jerk reactions. How can I get out the way of this explosion? I can run. You run. Problem solved. But creativity makes you think like, and I'm not saying you have the time to do this all the time, especially in situations with the military or the like, but creativity would make you question like, oh, there was an explosion. What was that explosion? Where'd that explosion come from? How'd that explosion come about? And then asking yourself those questions, maybe you would be able to prevent that explosion from happening in the future instead of just running from it and not figuring out what it is. And again, in our lives, that article, it was largely based on business, but the correlation between the two is that is the gap that we're trying to bridge between where we are and what we want. It's creativity. If you can create the space for your dreams to manifest, then you can in turn establish the things that you want to have in life. If you want to make more money, working a 9 to 5 necessarily isn't the solution, because there's only so many hours in a day and there's only so many places you can be. So what would be a creative solution to that? Identify a passive income that you can be a part of that makes you money even though you're not allocating your time to that specific endeavor. That's something that Robert Kiyosaki talks about in his book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And that comes from creativity. That idea comes from creativity. And from sitting back and looking at a situation as opposed to being like, oh, I need more money, let me work a second job or a third job. again, there's only 24 hours in a day. How many 9 to 5s can you work? Or if you're at a big job and you work so much overtime, or one job that pays what you want, but you can get more working overtime, how much overtime are you going to work before that interferes with your family life and, your spiritual life and, your mental health and your physical health and stuff like that. These are all things we have to take into consideration. And we can't take it into consideration if we're constantly in the fight or flight response. So my message to you guys today is simply like, let's just take a step back and consider our position and how we're situated, at the time of difficulty. Not every time or every moment that we experience some type of difficulty or hardship is it going to be the time to sit around and think. Sometimes you do have to jump and take action, which is what that fight or flight has been proven over time to be very effective in doing. But not every instance that you run into, every hardship that you run into, is going to be something that you need to have a fight or flight response to deal with. Creativity, by and large, can help you deal with the majority of the issues that you face in life. Because in life, us as like normal civilians, we don't face life or death decisions on a daily basis. Most of us. Now, there are occupations where that does happen, such as firemen or police officers or people in the military, stuff like that. They face life and death decisions on a daily basis, and even some other occupations that I haven't named. But by and large, for a majority of us, we do not face life or death decisions on a daily basis. So with that being the case, we have to carve out the space for ourselves to be creative, because this creativity in turn will help us process information and to create a solution that will have long-lasting effects opposed to an immediate justification.